What rule did your teacher break? I was sitting in music class when I felt the familiar tingling in my fingers. I've been seizure-free for 3 months, but I knew exactly what was coming. Miss Blackwood, I need to go to the nurse, I said, already feeling the electricity building in my brain. I'm about to have a seizure. The substitute teacher rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Every kid suddenly has epilepsy now. It's trendy. No, we don't understand. The tingling was already spreading up my arm. I had maybe 2 minutes before I lost consciousness. I have a seizure action plan in my file. Sit down. She walked over to my desk, but instead of helping, she leaned toward me. You know what my sister did when her daughter claimed she had seizures? She ignored her completely. Within a week, she was miraculously cured. Emily immediately jumped up and ran toward the emergency button by the door. She's not faking. I've seen her have seizures before. The substitute blocked her path. The only thing she's suffering from is a need for attention. Then she did something I'll never forget. She walked to the classroom door, locked the deadbolt, and slipped the key into her pocket. Nobody leaves until she admits she's faking. This victim mentality is destroying your generation. Call 911, someone shouted while reaching for their phone. Phone's in the box now, the substitute yelled, grabbing the phone collection box. Or you're all suspended. My vision was already starting to blur. 2 minutes. That's all I had before my brain completely misfired, the exact number my neurologist had taught me to remember. Then my cousin Walsh, who never liked me, spoke up. She used to fake seizures all the time when we were little. The substitute smiled. See, even her own cousin knows she's pretending. She walked over to the smartboard, opened YouTube, searched for flashing strobe light, 10 hours, and pressed play. You know what really helps fake seizures? Exposure therapy. If you were actually epileptic, I wouldn't do this. But since you're faking, the classroom filled with rapid flashes. White, black, white, black. It felt like my brain was being electrocuted. Turn it off. Emily screamed. Photosensitive epilepsy is real. Instead, the substitute turned the screen brightness all the way up. It's just a psychosomatic reaction. She believes she's having a seizure, so her body copies it. Then David suddenly grabbed his head. I can't. The lights. His whole body went stiff. The room exploded into panic. Students crawled under desks, threw jackets over their heads, and covered their eyes. Turn it off. Turn it off. Malik tried to shield my eyes with his hands. Please don't seize. Please. Ryan ran to the door and slammed his shoulder against it. Help. Somebody help. The substitute laughed. Sit down, or you're expelled. By now, 3 more students were on the floor. The flashing lights were triggering migraines, nausea, panic attacks, and other reactions throughout the room. Make it stop, Jenna cried, clutching her head. Through the classroom window, Mr. Peter, the teacher next door, looked inside. The substitute quickly stepped in front of the window, gave him a thumbs up, then pulled the shade down. He walked away, unaware of the chaos. This is torture, Emily screamed. I had less than a minute left. I could feel myself slipping away. My muscles were already twitching. Instead of stopping, the substitute increased the strobe speed. When I was in school, nobody had seizures. Now everyone's neurodivergent. Thanks, social media. Then my body stopped obeying me. The seizure hit like a lightning bolt. Sarah later told me what happened next because I don't remember any of it. My seizure became violent. My body thrashed uncontrollably. Foam gathered around my mouth, and my face started turning blue. Sarah tried to roll me onto my side, but my convulsions were too strong. She's dying, she screamed. My tongue had been bitten so badly that blood covered her hands. The substitute just stood there, casually eating an apple. Oscar-worthy performance, she said, though the fake blood is a bit much. That's when Billy finally snapped. He was one of the quietest, kindest kids in school and never got into trouble. He grabbed a music stand and charged forward like it was a battering ram. Violence? Really? The substitute said as she pulled out her phone to record. This is going straight to the principal. Billy swung the stand at the smartboard. Crack! The screen shattered and went black. Destruction of school property, the substitute screamed. That's a felony. But Billy wasn't finished. He turned and smashed the classroom door window. Glass flew everywhere. Just a few feet away, David was still having his own seizure. Jenna was vomiting from the flashing lights. The classroom had turned into complete chaos. "Assault!" the substitute shouted. "You're all going to jail." That's when my boyfriend, Darren, looked through the broken classroom window and completely lost it. Without thinking, he reached through the shattered glass, slicing his hand as he searched for the lock. "Don't you dare!" the substitute screamed. But Emily and Billy grabbed her and held her back. The door finally swung open, and teachers rushed into the classroom. "Call 911, someone shouted. "Multiple students are having seizures." Even as staff restrained her, the substitute kept yelling, "They're all faking. This is just mass hysteria." The paramedics later told my parents that I had been clinically dead for 90 seconds. They had to intubate me right there in the hallway, while another team worked on David just 10 feet away. That's when everyone discovered he had undiagnosed epilepsy. Meanwhile, Miss Blackwood was placed on paid leave while the school conducted an investigation. Several parents started a GoFundMe to help cover the students' medical expenses. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in science class when we got the news. David's family had only managed to raise $30,000 of the $130,000 needed for his treatment. He didn't survive. The moment I heard those words, I knew we couldn't let Miss Blackwood walk away from what she'd done. My hands shook so badly I couldn't even hold my pencil. The teacher kept explaining cell division, but all I could think about was that David's cells had stopped dividing because his family couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved him. I sat there frozen while everyone else kept taking notes, pretending everything was normal. As if David wasn't dead. As if Miss Blackwood wasn't sitting comfortably at home, still getting paid. The anger burned so fiercely inside me that I thought I was going to throw up. When the bell rang, I ran straight to the bathroom and barely reached the toilet before I got sick. Emily followed me in, held my hair back, and quietly whispered that we couldn't let Miss Blackwood get away with this. I knew she was right, but I could barely stand. My legs wouldn't stop shaking, and my head felt like it was splitting apart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying the 90 seconds when I had technically been dead. Nothing. Only darkness. I kept wondering if David experienced that same darkness, or if it was different for him. My parents checked on me almost every hour because they were terrified the stress would trigger another seizure. Mom would quietly peek into my room and ask if I needed anything. Dad would simply stand in the doorway, watching to make sure I was still breathing. The next morning at school, flowers, cards, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes covered David's locker. Someone had taped his school photo to the door. As students walked by, one freshman asked what had happened. When someone explained the seizure incident in music class, she actually said it sounded fake. I wanted to scream at her. Instead, I just stood there staring at the flowers. During lunch, I found Billy sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria. His knuckles were still wrapped in bandages from smashing the smartboard. When I sat down, I could tell he hadn't slept either. He admitted he couldn't stop seeing David lying on the classroom floor. We sat there in silence because there was nothing either of us could say that would change what had happened. Nothing was going to bring David back. After school, Darren was waiting by my locker with a stack of printed pages. Before Miss Blackwood made her social media accounts private, he'd managed to save everything. For years, she'd been posting cruel comments mocking children with disabilities. She called medical conditions trendy. She praised her sister's tough love approach to her daughter's so-called fake seizures. There were even photos of her speaking at conferences about fighting what she called victim mentality in schools. Every page made me feel sick. 3 days later, we attended David's funeral. The church was completely full. His mother, Nev, sat in the front row looking like she hadn't slept or eaten since losing her son. When I walked over to offer my condolences, she grabbed my hand so tightly it hurt. She kept talking about the GoFundMe, saying people had sent kind messages and prayers, but the $30,000 they raised still wasn't enough. Her grip was crushing my fingers, but I never pulled away. She just needed someone to hold on to. After the funeral, I saw Walsh standing beside his car in the parking lot. I couldn't stop myself. I walked straight up to him and asked how he could tell the substitute I was faking, knowing full well that I had epilepsy. Before he could answer, He broke down crying right there beside his car. Walsh stood there crying. He told me our grandmother had always convinced him I was faking my seizures for attention. Believing her was easier than accepting that I was actually sick. He kept apologizing, but no apology was ever going to bring David back. The following Monday, Principal Penn called my parents and me into her office. She sat behind her large desk, offering carefully rehearsed condolences while talking about procedures and school policies. She kept emphasizing that the school had followed protocol and that substitute teachers receive proper training. Not once did she admit those procedures had failed David. In fact, every time she said his name, she glanced at the lawyer who was sitting in on the call. My parents stayed as calm as they could, but I could see my dad's jaw tightening every time she mentioned protocol. After that meeting, they sent me to see Run Wigley, the district's 504 coordinator. They opened my accommodation file and put on a face full of practiced sympathy while reviewing my seizure action plan. They kept asking if there was anything they could have done differently, as if David hadn't just died because of their failures. It felt like they wanted me to reassure them that the system worked and everything was okay. But it wasn't okay. The system had failed. The system had killed David. Instead of accepting responsibility, they talked about updated training and revised procedures. All I could picture was David lying on that classroom floor having a seizure. Something about the whole situation still didn't make sense. Miss Blackwood seemed to know exactly which buttons to push. The flashing strobe lights, locking the classroom door, calling epilepsy trendy. It almost felt like she had planned the entire thing beforehand. I couldn't stop replaying it. David's body going stiff, his eyes rolling back, the substitute calmly eating an apple while he was dying. The administrators kept talking about moving forward and learning from the tragedy, but they never said what they had actually learned. They never admitted they were wrong. They never said David should still be alive. When I walked out of that office, I realized nothing was going to change unless we forced it to. Miss Blackwood would eventually return from paid leave, and another child could end up suffering the same fate. The school would hold more meetings about procedures and policies, but nothing would truly change. That's when Emily, Billy, Darren, and I decided to take action. We weren't going to let them bury the truth or pretend David had never existed. The first thing we did was go to the downtown police station. My mom drove us there in her minivan while Emily kept checking her phone for updates from the other parents. The station smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner. We sat in hard plastic chairs for nearly 2 hours before a detective finally called us into his office. There was a thick folder on his desk with David's name on it. I could even see the corner of his death certificate sticking out. The detective kept using phrases like alleged incident and ongoing investigation, while that folder sat right in front of him. He explained that cases like this take time and that there was a legal process they had to follow. My mom asked when we'd finally get answers. He simply shrugged. It could take weeks, maybe months. Emily's mom broke down crying. The detective handed her a box of tissues and said he understood our frustration, but they had to be thorough. He kept calling it an alleged incident even though David was dead, even though we had all witnessed what happened, even though the paramedics had documented everything. He said the school district was conducting its own investigation as well. Everything, he repeated, was under review. That was all he would say. 3 days later, my mom took me to the mall to buy a new pair of shoes. The food court was lit with old fluorescent lights that constantly buzzed and flickered. I didn't think much of them until we walked past Orange Julius. Suddenly the lights started pulsing. My chest tightened. My hands began to shake. The flickering lights instantly dragged me back to that classroom. I collapsed to the floor beside the pretzel stand. People stopped and stared. One kid even started recording me on his phone. Mall security rushed over, assuming I was on drugs or having some kind of breakdown. My mom kept trying to explain, but I couldn't catch my breath. The lights wouldn't stop flickering. Eventually, they escorted us out through an employee exit. As we left, everyone kept watching and whispering. I've never felt so helpless or so broken. The following Monday at school, a reporter from the student newspaper approached me. She already had her voice recorder in her hand. She said she wanted to write a story about everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to tell the student reporter everything, every single detail about what Miss Blackwood had done. But I also knew how these stories usually end. One wrong word, and suddenly the focus shifts. The school starts making it look like I exaggerated or made the whole thing up. They twist the story until the truth barely matters. So I told her I wasn't ready to talk yet. She kept pushing, saying people deserve to know the truth. Maybe she was right, but I wasn't ready. That weekend, I stayed in my room organizing everything. I pulled out my seizure action plan, the one the school was supposed to follow. Then I gathered every hospital record from the past 3 years, the emails my parents had sent before school started explaining my condition, and the letter from my neurologist. Every document felt important, like evidence, like proof that none of this should have happened. I made copies of everything and organized them into a binder with labeled tabs. My mom helped me scan every page, and we saved digital copies on 3 different flash drives just in case. While I was sorting through everything, I kept checking David's GoFundMe page. It was still stuck at $30,000. His family had needed $130,000 to cover his medical treatment before he passed away. The donations had stopped. The comments had slowed down. People had already moved on. That's how it always seems to happen. Something terrible happens, everyone cares for a week, and then life goes back to normal. Kids die because their families can't afford treatment, and somehow that's accepted as just the way things are. The anger was eating me alive. I felt sick all the time. That Sunday, Emily, Billy, and Malik came over to my house. We sat in my basement trying to figure out what to do next. Darren arrived late and sat alone on the stairs instead of joining us. He kept staring at his phone. Finally, Emily asked what was wrong. He admitted his football coach had warned him not to get involved because it could hurt his scholarship opportunities. That hurt more than I expected. He was supposed to be on our side. He was supposed to care about David, about me. But apparently his football scholarship mattered more. Emily suggested we file public records requests. Her older sister had done something similar for a school project before. So we spent hours writing requests for the 911 call recordings, hallway security camera footage, and every incident report related to what happened. We submitted everything to the school district that same week. Their response came back quickly. Because the case was part of an ongoing investigation, they couldn't release any records due to student privacy laws. It felt less like policy and more like a cover-up, like they were hiding something. That's when Emily's mom told us she knew a lawyer. Her name was Orla Purcell, and she specialized in civil rights cases. She agreed to meet us at her office downtown. The walls were covered with awards and photos of her standing beside important people. She listened to our entire story without interrupting once. When we finished, she agreed to represent us for free, as long as we stayed organized. She told us she needed solid evidence. Witness statements, medical records, documentation, everything carefully preserved. Then she gave us very specific instructions. Screenshot every social media post about the incident before it disappeared. Write down everything we could remember while it was still fresh. Collect contact information for every witness. But under no circumstances were we to contact Miss Blackwood. No messages, no confrontations, nothing that could be interpreted as harassment. The rules felt restrictive, but having a real plan gave me hope. For the first time since David died, I didn't feel completely helpless. That night, we created a group chat to organize everything. Emily would collect witness statements from classmates. Billy would organize all the documents. Malik would build a complete timeline of the incident. Everyone had a job. Everyone had something to focus on besides grief and anger. For the first time, it felt like we were actually fighting back. Like we weren't going to let them erase what happened. The next morning during homeroom, Principal Penn's voice came over the school intercom. The entire classroom fell silent. She cleared her throat twice before speaking, and it was obvious she was reading from a prepared statement. Any student participating in walkouts or protests during school hours will face automatic suspension and immediate removal from all extracurricular activities. The room stayed completely silent. Students exchanged nervous looks across the classroom. My hand started shaking because I knew exactly what the announcement meant. We had been talking about organizing something much bigger than collecting evidence. Now the school was trying to scare us into staying quiet. Principal Penn continued talking about maintaining order and protecting the learning environment. I stopped listening. Instead, I pulled out my phone beneath my desk and started texting. Within 5 minutes, our group chat had exploded with more than 40 messages. Every single one said the same thing. We were doing it anyway. Third period was when we planned to do it, and after everything that happened to David, nothing was going to stop us. The bell rang, and I grabbed my things and headed toward English class, trying to act normal even though my heart was racing. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed 3 security guards I had never seen before standing at the main entrance. They were watching every student and writing notes on clipboards. 2 more guards were posted at the side exits. The message was obvious. They wanted to intimidate us. It only made me angrier. Second period felt like it lasted forever. I checked the clock every couple of minutes while the teacher talked about symbolism in a novel. I couldn't focus on a single word. All I could think about was what we were about to do. Finally, the bell rang for third period. Everyone stood up to head to class. Instead, I turned toward the main entrance. Emily was already waiting there with Billy, Malik, and about 10 other students. More kids kept joining us from every hallway. One of the security guards stepped in front of the doors to block us. We kept walking. He started warning us about consequences, but 3 guards couldn't stop more than 40 determined students. We pushed past them and walked out into the parking lot, where even more students were already waiting. Some teachers stood quietly in their classroom doorways watching us. None of them tried to stop us. A few even gave us a small nod as we passed. We gathered on the front lawn and stood together in complete silence for David. There were no chants, no signs, just students standing side by side. Cars driving past began honking their horns in support, and people stopped to take pictures with their phones. After about 20 minutes, we quietly walked back into the school and returned to class as if nothing had happened. By the end of the day, yellow detention slips had been placed in every one of our lockers. Mine assigned me detention every day after school for the next 2 weeks. That night, Walsh somehow managed to make everything even worse. He posted an old video from a family barbecue 3 years earlier. In the video, I was laughing at one of my uncle's jokes and playing cornhole in the backyard. I looked happy. I looked healthy. Walsh captioned the video, claiming it proved I'd always been fine and only exaggerated my epilepsy whenever it got me attention. That betrayal hurt more than I can explain. He knew that video had been filmed on one of my good days between seizures, but he deliberately presented it as proof that I had been lying the entire time. I couldn't stop thinking about something else, too. Why did the detective keep calling it an alleged incident when David's death certificate was sitting right there on his desk? What exactly still needed investigating after a child had already died? And how is it possible that David's family was struggling to raise $130,000 for medical bills while the school continued paying Miss Blackwood during her leave? Everything about it felt horribly wrong. Within an hour, Walsh's post had been shared more than 200 times. The comments were vicious. People called me a liar. Some even blamed me for David's death, saying I had created unnecessary drama. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw my phone across my room. It slammed into the wall, and I heard the screen crack. The next morning, before first period, Darren found Walsh standing by his locker. By the time I arrived at school, I'd already heard what happened from 3 different people. Darren grabbed Walsh by his shirt and slammed him against the metal lockers so hard the sound echoed through the hallway. Walsh tried to say something, but Darren shoved him again. This time, Walsh's head hit the combination lock behind him. 2 teachers rushed over and pulled them apart. But before they could separate them completely, Darren managed one last shove that sent Walsh's books flying across the floor. Both of them were taken straight to the principal's office. By lunchtime, they had each been suspended for 3 days. Darren's mom had to leave work to pick him up. Knowing that he had gotten suspended because he was trying to defend me made me feel awful. That night, he texted me and said it had been worth it. But I knew his parents weren't happy. 3 days later, after turning her down 5 different times, I finally agreed to speak with the student journalist. We met in an empty classroom after school. Before the interview started, I made my boundaries clear. No questions about my family. No questions about my medical history before the incident. No speculation about who was to blame. Only the facts of what happened that day. My voice shook through the entire interview. Twice I had to stop and take a drink of water because my mouth had gone completely dry. When she asked about the strobe lights, I described exactly what it felt like when my brain began to misfire. She asked about the locked classroom door, and I explained how trapped and helpless we all felt. Then she asked about David that I couldn't speak for almost a full minute. When the interview was finally over, I felt completely drained, empty, exhausted, but at least I had finally told the story out loud to someone who was willing to write it down. That night, the article was published on the school newspaper's website. Within 2 hours, the comments section exploded. Some people supported us and shared their own experiences with teachers ignoring serious medical conditions. Others called us attention seekers who were looking for someone to blame for a tragedy. One person claimed David's death was simply bad timing and that we were unfairly attacking a good teacher. Another called us drama queens who wanted to make everything about ourselves. Reading complete strangers argue over whether David's death could have been prevented made me sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. 20 minutes later, my mom found me sitting on the bathroom floor crying. The next day, Orla called my mom with unexpected news. One of the paramedics who had worked on me that day had contacted her law office because he wanted to help. He couldn't speak publicly because his employer had strict policies about discussing active cases. But he said that if he were officially subpoenaed, he would testify about everything he witnessed. He remembered every detail, how long it took to revive me, the condition of the classroom when the emergency crews arrived. His testimony could prove just how serious the situation really was. 2 days later, we received the transcript from Mr. Peters' deposition. Instead of helping, it made everything even more heartbreaking. He testified that when he looked through the classroom window that day, he hadn't noticed anything unusual. He saw Miss Blackwood give him a thumbs up, assumed everything was under control, and kept walking. He also said the window shade had already been pulled down, so he had no reason to think any students were in danger. Reading those words crushed me. He had been only 20 feet away. He could have saved us. Instead, he walked away because he believed everything was fine. That was the moment I started losing faith in every adult who was supposed to protect us. Later that afternoon, Malik made an incredible discovery online. After searching for hours, he found an old blog Miss Blackwood had written 5 years earlier. She had apparently forgotten it still existed. Post after post was filled with angry rants about neurodivergent children. She claimed they were being coddled and were creating a victim culture in schools. In one post, she wrote that seizure disorders were overdiagnosed and that most kids only wanted attention and special treatment. In another, she accused parents of encouraging fake medical conditions to excuse bad behavior. Before she could delete anything, we took screenshots of every post and added them to our growing evidence folder. The next morning, Orla sent formal preservation letters to both the school district and the smartboard manufacturer. She demanded they preserve every electronic log connected to that classroom. Seeing everything written in formal legal language made the case feel far more serious than anything we had planned in our group chat. The following morning, every student found a letter in their mailbox with the teacher's union logo printed across the top. Di Paxton had written 3 full pages of legal warnings about what could happen if anyone posted Miss Blackwood's name online. Words like defamation, libel, and civil lawsuit practically jumped off the page. Students stood in the hallway passing copies around. Some immediately started deleting their social media posts from the night before. I watched 2 freshmen burst into tears after reading the parts about personal liability and permanent records. Emily grabbed my copy, ripped it in half right there in the hallway, and let the pieces fall to the floor. Within minutes, anger spread through the school. More and more students realized they were being threatened simply for telling the truth. Later that day, my mom picked me up early so we could go grocery shopping. I thought I was doing okay. Then the self-checkout machine started flashing red because it couldn't scan a barcode. The blinking light hit me like a hammer. My entire body went stiff. Suddenly, I couldn't remember where I was. My legs gave out beneath me, and I grabbed the counter to keep from collapsing. Mom dropped everything and wrapped her arms around me, carefully guiding me toward the exit. People stared as she practically carried me across the parking lot while I struggled to remember how to walk. Even after we reached the car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That's when I realized something terrifying. The triggers weren't getting better. They were getting worse. Now every flashing light felt like a threat, and my brain could no longer tell the difference between real danger and ordinary life. The next day, Darren started meeting me in my locker before every class. He walked me from one classroom to the next with his hand gently resting on my back, like he was afraid I might collapse at any moment. At lunch, he checked on me 3 different times to make sure I was actually eating. After school, he walked me all the way to my car, even though his was parked on the opposite side of the lot. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I told him I needed some space to breathe. He looked at me like I just slapped him. "I'm just trying to protect you," he said. We stood in the parking lot arguing for the first time since we started dating. He kept saying he couldn't lose me too. I kept telling him I wasn't made of glass. Neither of us won that argument. After that, we didn't speak for 2 days. That Thursday, someone leaked an email chain from the school administration. It spread through the school like wildfire. The subject line read, "Managing the paid leave situation." Asterisk, asterisk, every email focused on optics, liability, and media response. Not one of them mentioned David by name. Not one asked how the surviving students were doing. They referred to everything as the incident and discussed damage control as if we were nothing more than a public relations problem. Reading that cold, corporate language about a dead child made me sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. My hand was shaking as I forwarded the emails to Orla. She told me they were exactly the kind of evidence we needed. That night, the school board meeting was packed with parents, teachers, students, and reporters. Each speaker was given only 2 minutes. Emily spoke first. Billy spoke second. I was third. My voice cracked the moment I said David's name, but I forced myself to keep reading from my notes, explaining exactly what had happened that day. Behind me, I could hear parents whispering. Some called it mass hysteria. Others accused us of being attention-seeking teenagers. One father actually laughed while I described my seizure. I wanted to turn around and scream at him. Instead, I finished speaking until my 2 minutes were over. During the public comment session, Ren stood up carrying a thick folder of documents. He proposed mandatory medical emergency training for every substitute teacher, along with updated emergency response procedures. The school board nodded, took notes, and said the program could be implemented by the next academic year. I wanted to scream. David had needed that training 6 weeks ago, not next September. Hearing that timeline felt like another slap in the face. The following week, Orla helped us file a federal complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. The woman we spoke with was kind, but she explained that the investigation could take up to 18 months. She talked about conducting a thorough and comprehensive investigation. I just stared at the calendar, thinking about David already being gone. Justice delayed felt no different than justice denied when the person who needed justice most was already dead. Every form we filled out felt meaningless. But Orla reminded us that building a paper trail mattered. Back at school, things kept getting worse. Students started avoiding me in the hallways. Rumors spread that I only wanted attention and that I'd finally gotten it. Never mind that David was the one who had paid the price. One morning, I found the words "Drama Queen" written across my locker in permanent marker. The whispers followed me everywhere. People claimed I'd ruined Miss Blackwood's career for nothing. The physical pain was difficult, but the loneliness hurt even more. That Sunday night, Emily came over to my house. Her eyes were red, and tears kept running down her face. Her parents had given her an ultimatum. They told her she needed to choose between her future and what they called my vendetta. They believed staying by my side would ruin her chances of getting into college. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Then she promised she wasn't leaving me, no matter what anyone threatened. We sat on my bed, crying together until it was time for her to go home. The following Monday after school, Mr. Peter asked if we could talk privately. His hands were trembling. He admitted he should have looked more carefully through that classroom window. He said he couldn't sleep anymore because he kept thinking about what he failed to do. The guilt in his eyes seemed genuine, but no amount of regret could bring David back. He asked if there was anything he could do to help. I told him that if we ever got a hearing, he needed to testify. 3 days later, the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope from the Office for Civil Rights. My hands shook as I tore it open at the kitchen table. The letter had an official government seal across the top. It began by acknowledging our complaint and listed our case number, **2024-1847**, in bold print. Mom stood beside me. Reading over my shoulder as I scanned the formal language, explaining that they had officially received our complaint and would begin investigating the school district. It was only paperwork, but seeing our official case number made everything feel real. The next morning, I was opening my locker when something slipped out and landed by my shoe. It was a small black USB drive with no label. I picked it up, thinking someone had accidentally dropped it there. During lunch, I went to the library, plugged it into my laptop, and found a single video file. The timestamp showed it had been recorded on the day everything happened in music class. My stomach dropped as I clicked play. The video was grainy security camera footage from the hallway. For about 30 seconds, the camera had a clear view through our classroom door window. You could see students diving under desks. Someone was clearly having a seizure on the floor, and Miss Blackwood was standing there, doing absolutely nothing. The angle wasn't perfect, but the chaos was unmistakable. So was her complete lack of response during a medical emergency. I immediately texted Emily. She ran over from the cafeteria, and we watched the video 3 times before calling Orla. She answered on the second ring. Her first instruction was clear. Don't send it to anyone. Don't even make copies. She explained that the chain of custody for evidence was critical, and if we handled it the wrong way, the video could be thrown out in court. Someone inside the school had risked everything to get that footage to us. We had no idea who it was, or why they had chosen me. That afternoon, Mom drove me to the Pritchard family's house. David's mother was waiting in the living room with tissue boxes and several photo albums spread across the coffee table. She quietly led me upstairs to David's bedroom. Everything looked exactly the way he'd left it that morning before school. His bed was only half made. His chemistry textbook was still open on his desk. A stack of college applications sat beside his computer. The application for Northwestern University was on top. His essay was completely finished, but it had never been submitted. We sat together on the edge of his bed. She held my hand and told me she had hired her own attorney to file a civil lawsuit against both the school district and Miss Blackwood personally. Then she asked if I would be willing to testify about everything that happened. I nodded without hesitation. David deserved justice, even if he wasn't here to see it. Before I left, she showed me his journal. Inside, he'd written about his dream of becoming a doctor. He wanted to help children with neurological conditions like epilepsy, never knowing he had the condition himself. The next day after school, Darren asked if we could talk in private. We sat together in his car in the parking lot while he stared silently at the steering wheel. Finally, he explained that his basketball scholarship to state was now in jeopardy because of everything that had happened. His coach had warned him to stay out of the public fight against Miss Blackwood. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he told me he still loved me. But he couldn't risk losing the one opportunity that could change his future. I understood. College was his only real chance to leave our town behind. Still, it felt like he was choosing his future over standing up for what was right. When he dropped me off at home, I watched his car disappear down the street. Deep down, I knew our relationship would never be the same again. 2 days later, Mom drove me to my first therapy appointment. The office was in a small building downtown. The therapist started by having me fill out paperwork about my seizure triggers. She explained that we'd focus on practical ways to manage stress and light sensitivity to reduce the chances of future seizures. Before I left, she gave me homework. I had to keep a journal of every trigger I experienced throughout the week. Accepting that assignment meant accepting something much harder. This was my new normal. She also taught me breathing exercises and showed me special glasses designed to filter certain light frequencies that might help prevent seizures. That weekend, I was scrolling through social media when Emily suddenly called me, screaming. Someone had created a fake account using my name and profile picture. The account had posted screenshots of my medical records, including my epilepsy diagnosis and medication list, alongside cruel comments accusing me of faking everything for attention. By the time we reported the account and got it removed, it was already too late. The screenshots had spread through group chats. Anonymous accounts were reposting them everywhere. Someone had illegally accessed my private medical records and posted them online, trying to humiliate me. But no matter how hard we looked, we couldn't figure out who was behind it. Orla suggested I take back control of my own story by recording a video explaining exactly what had happened that day. I set my phone up in my bedroom and spent nearly 3 hours trying to get through the facts without crying or breaking down. The final video was 8 minutes long. I calmly walked through the timeline of the incident and explained every action Miss Blackwood took that put multiple students in danger. Posting was terrifying, but for the first time, it felt like I was telling my own story instead of letting other people twist it. Within 2 days, a local news reporter named Seamus Rader contacted Orla asking for an interview. That evening, he aired a news segment featuring parts of my video along with interviews from other parents whose children had been in the classroom. After the story aired, the station was flooded with tips about Miss Blackwood's behavior at previous schools. One person reported that, years earlier, she had locked a diabetic student in a closet during a blood sugar emergency. Not long after that, the police scheduled formal interviews with all 23 students who had been inside the classroom that day. Orla sat beside me as my attorney while I gave my statement. The detectives asked detailed questions about every minute of that day. A court stenographer recorded every word I said while 2 detectives took notes. Orla later told me that Miss Blackwood's attorney had advised her not to speak with investigators. She said that was usually a sign that her lawyer knew the situation was serious. 2 days later, I was at Orla's office reviewing paperwork when the school district's IT technician called. She put him on speaker so we could both hear. He had recovered the smartboard activity logs from our classroom on the day of the incident. There it was, a YouTube video titled Extreme Strobe Light Challenge, 10 hours. The log showed it played from 11:42 a.m. until 11:54 a.m. The exact time everything happened. They also showed that Miss Blackwood's own login credentials had been used to start the video, switch it to full screen mode, and set the brightness to maximum. Seeing that digital proof made my chest tighten. It confirmed everything we'd been saying, but it didn't bring David back, and it couldn't erase what happened to the rest of us. The following morning, a certified letter arrived from the school district's attorneys. Inside was an offer. They would pay me $50,000 if I agreed to settle the case. The agreement also included a strict non-disclosure clause. If I signed it, I could never publicly talk about what happened again. Mom sat at the kitchen table reading through all 20 pages while I quietly ate my cereal. Every few minutes, she shook her head. The section that upset her the most said I couldn't post about the case on social media, give interviews, or participate in any future legal action against either the school district or Miss Blackwood. The money would cover nearly all of my ambulance bill, emergency room treatment, and the new medication I now needed because my seizures had become worse after that day. But accepting the settlement meant staying silent. It meant never speaking publicly about David's death. It meant pretending everything was over while Miss Blackwood remained on paid leave as though nothing had happened. 3 days later, Malik texted everyone and asked us to meet in his garage after school. Apparently, every student involved had received the exact same settlement offer. When I got there, 12 of us were already standing around his dad's workbench with our letters spread out in front of us. Billy paced back and forth across the garage. "We should all refuse," he said. "If we take the money, they win." Sarah disagreed. Her family desperately needed the money to pay for therapy because she couldn't sleep without seeing David's face turning blue. The argument grew louder. Then someone's older brother, who was in law school, arrived and explained something none of us had realized. If we accepted the settlements, we wouldn't be able to testify in each other's cases or support David's parents in their wrongful death lawsuit. The garage erupted. Everyone started arguing about whether we owed it to David to reject the money. Emily quietly grabbed my arm and led me outside where it was quieter. She looked me straight in the eyes and said anyone who accepted the settlement was basically saying David's life was only worth $50,000. Then Walsh showed up. He argued that we'd be foolish to turn down guaranteed money when a trial could drag on for years, and we might lose anyway. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Darren. He told me I should accept the money, transfer to another school district, and start over somewhere no one knew me as the seizure girl. When I showed the message to Emily, she immediately became angry. She said that was exactly what the school district wanted. For us to disappear, to stay quiet, and let them sweep everything that happened under the rug. The stress of being caught between everyone became so overwhelming that my hands started shaking. I had to sit down on the curb because I felt another seizure coming on. That was enough to stop the argument. Malik quickly brought me some water, and everyone gathered around to make sure I was okay. For a few minutes, nobody said another word. The next day at school, Principal Penn pulled me out of English class and asked me to come to her office. When I walked in, she had an entire presentation ready. She started talking about a restorative justice healing circle, where Miss Blackwood would apologize to all of us. We'd share our feelings and then move forward together as a school community. She even had a PowerPoint filled with stock photos of smiling people hugging and sitting in circles holding hands. She explained that this process would help everyone heal. Then she asked if that wouldn't be better than all the legal fighting that was tearing the school apart. The timing felt impossible to ignore. Right when everyone was deciding whether to accept settlement offers, suddenly there was a healing circle. It made me wonder who had told her about our meeting in Malik's garage the day before, and why she had called only me in her office. I looked at her and said I wasn't interested in sitting in a circle pretending to forgive someone who had killed my classmate. Her smile immediately tightened. She told me that killed was a very strong word and suggested I think about how my inflammatory language might be affecting other students as they process their trauma. She kept insisting that Miss Blackwood was suffering too and deserved the opportunity to make amends. That was enough. I stood up, walked out of her office, and didn't say another word. I knew that if I stayed any longer, I'd probably say something that would get me suspended. Later that afternoon, Orla called with new information. David's mother's attorney had contacted her about coordinating our cases. The school district, she explained, appeared to be offering different settlement amounts to different families based on how likely they thought each family was to fight. The attorney, Na Pritchard, wanted all of the families working together so the district couldn't divide us and settle the cases one by one. Knowing David's mother was still fighting made me feel less alone in refusing to take the money and stay silent. Over the next 2 weeks, Orla had me come to her office after school almost every day to prepare for my deposition. She made me tell the story again and again and again. She played the role of Miss Blackwood's attorney, asking aggressive questions designed to make me sound dishonest or like I just wanted attention. She taught me to pause before answering, to answer only the question that was asked, not to volunteer extra information, and to stay calm, even when the questions made me furious. Sometimes she'd ask things like whether I'd ever exaggerated my symptoms before, or whether I enjoyed the attention I received because of my seizures. We even practiced what would happen if I had a seizure during the deposition. Orla made sure the court reporter knew exactly how to document it. She also had all of my medical alert information ready in case the opposing attorneys tried to claim I was faking. On the morning of Miss Blackwood's deposition, I wasn't allowed inside the room. But afterward, Orla told me everything. She said Miss Blackwood sat there wearing a navy blue suit and insisted that all of us had been pretending. She claimed that teenage girls were especially vulnerable to mass hysteria and attention-seeking behavior. She even brought up her niece, saying her sister's daughter had supposedly faked seizures for 2 years until her parents stopped enabling her. According to Miss Blackwood, the girl was miraculously cured. She used that story as proof that she genuinely believed we had all been faking. She even claimed that was why she felt comfortable using the flashing strobe lights as a form of exposure therapy. When the lawyers asked her about David, she said he had probably gotten caught up in the group hysteria. She described his death as an unfortunate coincidence, but insisted it had nothing to do with anything she had done. Hearing that made me so angry my hands started shaking. I had to leave Orla's office and walk around the block 3 times before I could calm down. The following week was Mr. Peter's deposition. This time, Orla let me watch through the glass window outside the room. I saw Mr. Peter break down, crying, when they asked about looking through our classroom window that day. He admitted that he saw Miss Blackwood give him a thumbs up and assumed everything was under control because she looked calm. He confessed that he never really looked at the students. He never noticed the panic. He never saw the chaos happening behind her. Now, he said he couldn't sleep because he kept wondering how different everything might have been if he had simply opened the classroom door. His tears looked genuine. He apologized over and over. But no matter how sorry he was, it still couldn't bring David back. And no amount of apologies could fix my brain. After that day, my seizures were happening twice as often as they had before. One thing kept sticking with me. Miss Blackwood never apologized. Not once. The final deposition that week was with Di Paxton, the district superintendent. For nearly 3 hours, he explained that the district's substitute teacher training program was comprehensive, but claimed Miss Blackwood had acted completely outside the scope of her training. It felt like he was throwing her under the bus while protecting the district from responsibility. He kept repeating phrases like isolated incident and couldn't have been prevented, while the district's lawyer nodded along. When they asked him about David, he called it a tragic outcome, but he insisted the district had followed every required protocol. That was hard to hear. No one had called 911 immediately because Miss Blackwood had locked the classroom door and taken away our phones. By the time the ambulance arrived, 15 minutes had already passed. 3 weeks later, it was Walsh's turn to give his deposition. I watched through the glass as he sat staring down at his hands. The attorney asked him about what happened in music class. Instead of talking only about that day, he started talking about our grandmother. He said she had spent years convincing him that I was faking my epilepsy for attention. According to him, she called every week to warn him about my so-called manipulation. She insisted I had fooled doctors. She sent him articles about Munchausen syndrome and reminded him of family events where she claimed I had pretended to be sick. The attorney carefully wrote everything down while Walsh explained that our grandmother had convinced him helping me would only encourage my behavior. He admitted she had poisoned his view of me for years. But he also admitted that wasn't an excuse for what he had done. The next morning at school, everything felt different. Some students stopped me in the hallway just to apologize for not doing more that day. Malik handed me a card signed by half the basketball team. Others still rolled their eyes whenever they saw me. I overheard people whispering that we were overreacting. Some said David probably would have died anyway because of his condition. One girl claimed we were only filing the lawsuit to get money. The cafeteria slowly divided into 2 groups. One side wore purple ribbons in David's memory. The other believed we had taken everything too far. Arguments started turning into fights in the parking lot as students debated whether Miss Blackwood deserved what was happening to her. 2 months later, our case finally reached court. The judge reviewed the testimony, examined the medical records, and watched the video Billy had managed to record before Miss Blackwood took his phone. She granted a preliminary injunction requiring every school employee to complete seizure response training within 30 days. But she refused to order Miss Blackwood's immediate dismissal. The judge explained that due process had to be followed and that Miss Blackwood had legal rights too. Our attorney told us it was still a major victory. It didn't feel that way to me. Miss Blackwood was still collecting her full salary. Another month passed before the school district finally came back with a settlement. They agreed to create a $200,000 memorial fund in David's name to support epilepsy research. They also promised to completely overhaul substitute teacher training and require every staff member to become certified in responding to medical emergencies. Miss Blackwood agreed to resign while the state board reviewed her teaching license. The district's attorney called it a fair resolution. David's parents simply sat there crying. That same week, I had another appointment with my neurologist. The test results weren't good. Because of everything I'd been through, my seizure threshold had dropped significantly. She increased my medication and warned me to avoid every possible trigger. Flashing lights, lack of sleep, emotional stress, That was when I realized I had to end my relationship with Darren. We sat together in his car after school while I explained that I couldn't handle a relationship on top of everything else. He kept saying he understood, but his eyes were red, and he couldn't bring himself to look at me. We had been together for 2 years, but my mind and my body couldn't handle any more pressure. The following week, Emily and I started a disability advocacy group at school. 20 students came to the very first meeting in the library. We talked about creating buddy systems for students with medical conditions and pushing for stronger emergency response policies. One girl with diabetes shared how a teacher had refused to let her check her blood sugar during an exam. A boy with Tourette's syndrome talked about getting detention because of his tics. Together, we began planning a presentation for the school board and started a petition calling for mandatory disability awareness training. For the first time in a long while, I had something positive to focus on. It didn't erase the anger, but it gave me somewhere to put it. One Saturday morning, when the cemetery was quiet and empty, and I visited David's grave. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We didn't talk about Miss Blackwood. We didn't talk about any of it. We just sat quietly on the grass beside David's headstone, watching the clouds drift across the sky. His parents had chosen a quote about how light never truly goes out. It simply changes form. I absent-mindedly pulled blades of grass from the ground while tracing David's name carved into the granite. After about an hour, we walked back to our car without saying a word. There wasn't anything left to say. Some things can't be fixed with words, or money, or even justice. The following week, I spent every evening writing an article for the local newspaper about everything that had happened. I didn't attack anyone personally. I didn't use emotional or inflammatory language. I simply laid out the facts. I wrote about the systemic failures that led to David's death. I explained the lack of proper training for substitute teachers, the absence of effective medical emergency procedures, and the culture that too often dismisses students' medical conditions as nothing more than attention-seeking. I ended the article by proposing specific changes: mandatory medical emergency training, clear reporting procedures, real accountability for schools and staff. Before I submitted it, I read the entire article to my parents. My voice stayed calm the whole time, not because I had healed, but because I had finally learned how to carry the pain without letting it consume me. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. It means more than you know. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to like the video. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video. It really helps the channel grow. And if you love emotional love stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support. See you in the next story.